Hello, everyone. Shane. This is the Data Protection Workgroup meeting. Today is March 11th, 2020. This meeting will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. And Xiangqian will be my co-host today. Let's get started. So today, okay, first I will just give an update on KubeCon. I think everybody knows that it's postponed to July, August. And we have not seen the date set. So the final date of whether it's July or August is not set yet. So there is a link there. They will give update later. There is one item from Calicia, but she's not here today, so we're going to do that next time. So Xiangqian is going to talk about application API today. And after that, Jeff and John will give an update of the object backlit cap. Xiangqian, want to get started? Let me stop sharing.
Sure. I hope everyone stays healthy these days. Looks like there's quite some noise out there because the virus.
Yeah.
Give me a second. Probably we'll have problem sharing again. Let me try. Can you guys see my screen? Probably not, huh?
No, I cannot.
That is interesting. Shin, could you open the doc and share? I don't think I can share here. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let me share it. Okay, can you see it?
Thanks.
Yeah.
I can see it. Anyone else have any problem? If not, I can move forward.
I can see it.
Sounds good. I've already shared the doc to the group, the entire group. Everybody should have access. Later on, I will update the link in today's meeting. So background, 2 weeks back, we invited Morten to give us a talk about the SIG Apps application API to see whether what it does and basically cover the basis of it. And this is a follow-up on top of that to see what are the advantages or are there any disadvantages or limitations on this application API in terms of in the data protection context. So just to give a little bit of background, we can actually probably skip all this background going on, long goals, etc., because people can read later. But more importantly, we want to figure out is one of the problems we are looking to solve is that how do we effectively take an application consistent snapshot or backup in a Kubernetes environment. So to solve this problem, one of the first problem we need to solve is like, okay, here are some of the here is your Kubernetes cluster, and here is an exhaustive list of resources. But what are the resources that constitute this application? And we need kind of a grouping mechanism that gives you back a list of resources that can define an application. That list of resources could be a deployment plus some PVC plus some secret plus some service account, etc. Or it can be simply just a set of deployment or stateful set, etc. So SIG Apps application does give you this kind of grouping concept. So I went ahead along with my colleague Andrew and did some research, more research on this. Could you move down a little bit? Xin? So here, I will focus on the six apps application. In terms of resource grouping, the application API defines the resource that can be will be grouped into an application using a combination of group kinds plus label. That was Morten mentioned in the last session, is exactly as he said. One of the things is that they offer also this interesting idea of adding ownership. The application API can claim, controller can claim ownership to the resources you labeled correctly, so that later on they can do like interesting gadget collection on top of that. And on top, this is basically things I covered last time. What I want to focus more, could you go down a little bit more, please, Jim? Is this, which we didn't cover too much in the in last session, which is the status field. A little bit more, please. Okay, now, every single application that will have a status field. And in this status field, there are a couple of fields that we might be interested for. The reason why I mentioned it over here is connecting the scenarios within when taking a consistent application snapshot or backup, and execute a pre-hook and the post-hook might be needed to kind of freeze the application. But when to run this hook is normally a big question. For example, your stateful set may still in a stage of ramping up and bringing up all the pods. In this case, even if you issue a hook execution to a certain container within that pod, most likely it will fail because the pod is still not in a ready status. In the application API, there are a couple of fields. One is the so-called components ready, and the second is conditions, and the third is the condition list, which gives you a nice overview of how healthy it is for this particular application. How it works is that for the components ready, it's kind of a global view. Basically, what it gives you is, for example, if you label, let's say 10 resources that belongs to an application, then it gives you back how many of them are ready and how many of them are in total. For example, total number would be 10 and ready number would be 9 or something like that. Until it reaches to a point where you feel comfortable about all the containers you're looking to execute post or pre-hooks in the already, you probably should not kick off the application snapshot. Okay, somebody's asking a question. Let me post this thing there. The link has been posted in the chart, I'm sorry. And then there's a condition field. And this field is still an overview about the whole application. The component list, however, records the status. It's an inline JSON object. It records the status of every single component that constitutes the application. The criteria of defining whether an application is ready or not, I have a link over there. It's basically follow the, if you click on the link, please, Shane.
This one?
Yep,
Right.
thank you. It's basically follow the Kubernetes standard way. For example, for deployment, they verify this status, stateful set to verify this status, and make sure there's enough replicas and ready replicas, etc., that is running. But for for component that is not listed over here, for example, a bare poor pod or some PVC, then it relies on a standard way. I can post the code later.
This is a PVC here. Looks like there's a PVC here.
Yeah, the PVC is not checked as a regular one over there. I'll explain later on.
Okay.
It's not this is an exhaustive list, whereas in the application controller, it doesn't check everything go on.
Okay, but basically, depending on the kind, and then it has to go through all of the checks.
That's right.
To determine.
Based off the component kind, it carries on corresponding checks on top of the resource, the controller, and then go ahead and update the conditions. I personally feel this is very helpful in this in the data protection context.
Right, but then it's kind of limited to this well-defined types, right?
That's right. That's
hard
right.
to extend.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Go back, please. The original doc.
Okay.
Then we went back and start thinking, right? So if you go down a little bit, please. Xin?
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Thank you. So basically, when we try to take application consistent snapshot or backup, the couple of steps need to happen, right? Again, this is not strictly ordered, and that's Xin's question over there. We probably want to create and uncreate an application before and after. We probably also want to snapshot and backup the config data, basically the resource definition of an application within this Kubernetes cluster. We want to snapshot and backup the volume that is serving the data purpose for this application. And then eventually we want to uncreate the application. Again, those steps are not in a strict order because for different considerations. For example, we can choose to snapshot the configuration first and then create the application and then take volume backups and snapshot to reduce the end-to-end latency, latency in terms of hook execution. It is not a decided ordered, strictly ordered procedure, but those are the steps we need to follow, right? And then if you look back, what we are looking to solve with the application API over here is really about two things, right? One thing is, how do we effectively, does it give us sufficient kind of, support in terms of resource grouping? That's the first thing. And second thing is how much we can leverage a status field to queries and unqueries of application. So moving to the consideration pieces. So they are definitely.
I had a question for you.
Please.
Does this model account for things like logical snapshots? So for example, MySQL dump or Postgres dump. Would that category of backups also fit into this model, or would that be something separate?
It is out of the scope of this doc at this moment.
Okay.
But that's an interesting point. What I want to focus on is how do we model the Kubernetes native constructs in terms of a snapshot and backup. For example, your deployment definition, your stateful set definition, etc., etc. Does it make sense to you?
Sounds good.
So there are definitely other alternatives, right? Two kind of models. I have to admit that these two models I haven't got enough time to really think them through, both of them. The first model is something like Flux. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Flux. In short, right, it's basically a system that gives you GitOps, continuous deployment and upgrading experiences. So how it works is that it maintains externally managed, basically managed by GitHub, managed repository that tells the Flux system when to pull. You can configure Flux actually, when to pull the latest updates from your GitHub. A similar thing can be applied over here. Is how about we maintain a user maintains a exhaustive list of resources that can be used in the data protection context, which means that they will have full access to what to snapshot, what to back up, and this management of the manifest is out of band of Kubernetes. In this way, they don't need to touch any of the Kubernetes resources, but just signal some kind of system that, hey, this is the resource I need you to snapshot and back up for me into some other places. And this is one of the models. And the other model is more like canister. This is basically a combination of resource grouping plus some actions. And that requires probably a new API, maybe. Let's say call it protected application. I don't know what's the name. I'm really bad at naming. And this will trim away some of the unnecessary fields in the current SIG apps application. However, keeps the grouping, resource grouping using labels and the group kinds, plus define the actions like I want to execute these hooks during my snapshot, or this is a snapshot action, or this is a backup action. And this is another model. So because of the time limitation, I only did a kind of comparison between the option A and also SIG apps applications to see what are the advantages and what are the limitations that SIG apps API has. This from my perspective. So very obviously, SIG apps API will be managed and maintained by SIG apps. So this is a huge advantage actually to me, because that means we kind of have this piece taken care of. It does provide application abstraction to group resource in a native Kubernetes constructor. That basically is the API itself. And the status, compared to option A, if we remember the externally managed list, we don't have any status that it can rely on in that model. And in this case, the application API seems to provide you some kind of rich information with regarding to all the component, the healthiness of all the components, and it may give you some hint in terms of when to conduct certain options, certain actions. But it does face quite some limitations actually. If you go down a little bit more, please, Shin. The first thing is that if you look at the current resource group mechanism, basically it is a combination of group kind plus a selector. So this does require users to manually label all top level resources. This applies to both existing workload and a new workload. So you're gonna to tell the application controller some kind of label that it can use to grab all the resources around the application. That's the first thing. Compared to option A basically the user has to draft the detailed, exhaustive manifest for the first time. And this thing can potentially be a template that later on can be applied to others as well. And the second thing is, which concerns me the most, is this no guarantee at all that labels on the top level resources will bubble down to the labels the top level resource on the resource that the top level resource owns. If there's a template involved in the top level resources, this is the worst. This is even worse. For newly created workload, if you are using Stateful Set, for example, you typically use a PVC template, right? For newly created one, if you specify the label in the first place, yes, the label will bubble down by the Stateful Set controller to all the PVCs, even though you are using the PVC template. That's less of a concern. What I'm more concerned about is for existing stateful workloads. Existing stateful workloads, even though you modify the stateful set to add a label so that application can claim this stateful set. But that label will not bubble down to all the PVC ions. And that will cause problems like, okay, we might end up snapshotting a stateful set, but not its PVCs, which to me, it's kind of an incomplete snapshot. It's undetermined. The behavior is undeterministic. So that's actually the things, one of the things that bother me the most from the application API. Not to say if you have some custom CRDs that defined by user themselves or some third party, and then the application API won't be easily able to discover all the resources they need to mark into that consist this application.
So for that issue that you're talking about where it wouldn't bubble down, are you thinking, I'm not quite clear on it, are you saying that for an application that's already running, it already has all the PVs and everything are allocated for it, and then you try to fit it in, and then you try and apply an application CRD to it, that you don't think things will bubble down properly? Or are you talking about the YAMLs and stuff that have already been defined and you're deploying a new application, but it's now using application CRD, but it hasn't been modified properly internally?
There are two scenarios over here, right? One scenario is is the first scenario where, let's say you have an existing stateful set already up, deployed in a Kubernetes cluster. Now you want to say create an application around that stateful set as one of the components, right? If you want to do it rightly, what you want to be doing is, okay, labeling both the stateful set and all its PVCs correspondingly, so that the application could claim all the important, all the related resources to that application. If you only label the stateful set, that label will not bubble down to the PVCs because it has been already created by the stateful set controller, right? For newly created ones, it's not an issue for stateful set because stateful set will manage that as long as you label the top level stateful set correctly. But it might be an issue for other workload types that defined by the user or by a third party, right? In this case, either the controller guarantees that do the same thing, similar thing as stateful set, and the bubble down all these labels on the top level to all its related resources, or the application will just miss it.
Hey, Xiangchen, you want to go through the example, the YAML? I think that might help people understand how the
Sure,
API
I'm not
works.
sure whether I have enough time because I have a couple of points to cover as well.
Okay,
Actually,
yeah.
could I jump in for a second?
Sure.
I think the limitation around stateful set is, I think that seems to be one of the unique cases. And I know that, most controllers out there are handling that. That's something we could possibly look and work with SIG apps to see if we can start propagating labels down.
I certainly agree with you, but I'm not sure whether this is, you mean the stateful set controller, not the SIG apps application controller, right?
That's what I meant. I think if stateful sets, the controller is creating dependent objects, then we could work there to make sure that they're discoverable and they fit into this model. Because even if we go with some other scheme, even if we don't use the application CRD as a grouping mechanism, this is always going to be an issue.
Fair enough.
So is this something that is handled by Canister? Like, do you support stateful set and all of those workload APIs? Or maybe we can talk about this in next meeting too. If
we'll talk about it. We can talk about it next, but I know Canister, Valero, K10, I think all of these are actually have logic where they discover PVCs attached to stateful sets. And I think Dave mentioned this in the last meeting that if we don't solve this in some way, everybody who implements something around data protection is going to have to implement that logic.
That's right. I absolutely agree with you. It's better to be there's a
But
generic way or in the supported in the community that solves this problem. I totally
yeah,
agree.
but I think it's important not to throw out any good solutions just because they don't work for stateful sets. Maybe we just fix stateful sets.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Again, this thing is whatever I observed at this point. I'm not suggesting any directions at this point.
Got it.
And the problem still applies to deployments as well, especially if you've pre-created volumes, for example. You're not the one creating the volume, so should you be the one adding labels to it, right?
That's right. But in that case, in the deployment, volumes will be considered as top level, right?
Okay.
Yep.
Right. That actually is not a problem because the deployment doesn't use template.
That's true.
Not for the volumes, but it does for the pods. But in a pod case, it'll just restart the pod if you update the pod template, I think.
Yes, one of the questions I think we need to ask this group in general is how do we treat pods, right? In an application snapshot or backup scenario, do you really want to snapshot your pod? I mean, the pod definition.
Right.
Right.
I guess I'm veering off topic there, but the difference between the stateful set and the pod there is you don't want to like throw away your PV because a label changed, because you don't want to throw away your PV. You just want to add, if possible, you just want to add a label to it. That's the change I think we would want to see here.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see which direction the market pushes us. Like from the from the VMware side, we've traditionally done things like snapshot and backup VMs, and in some cases even the VM memory state. I think we want to, from the existing Kubernetes side, that's a like, oh, why would you want to do that? But customers may push us in that direction. So that starts to push you towards like, hey, I actually want to keep the internal state of my pod around. We'll see where we go. I probably would try not to put it in, but also try not to completely lock it out.
Sure. Could you explain and actually explain a little bit more there over here? Because what kind of scenarios?
So we use, for example, like snapshot or pause and move quite often. So we can move VMs between physical hosts, and the entire memory state is moved. The VM comes up on the other side, and it's still got the same program counters, threads, memory, all that. It just resumes. So those kind of things are doable right now, and customers rely on this to some extent. Like, and even in doing a backup, it's probably not as useful to back up the memory state, but it is possible. And so, like, our snapshots can snapshot the memory state.
Yeah, I see your point. Probably, yeah. This probably is a good use case in a virtual machine world. In Kubernetes, probably it's a little against the design principle, but yeah, certainly.
Exactly, I agree. It's against the design principle. I'm worried that customers are going to start pushing us in that direction anyway.
Sure, then maybe we should push back then. We'll see. Yeah, I have 2 more minutes. Let me finish over the thing. Another things I have with the application API, it's majorly. It does contains a lot of useful information for UI rendering, but those information are just not relevant in the data protection kind of context. If you look around, they contains, for example, icons, who are the maintainers of a certain image, etc., etc. And this is a big section of the API itself. And that's another thing. Third thing, has not been very widely adapted at this moment, probably because it is all still on beta. I don't see a lot of references on GitHub. That's based on my search. And the fourth thing, it's Helm chart support. This is definitely something myself still need to look into deeper. But in short, Helm chart allows you to group. Let me put it this way. It's a slightly different model than application API for Helm chart. So applications can be part of a Helm chart, but not vice versa at this moment. That's my understanding. So using that, how do we effectively model around Helm charts? It's gonna be challenging. I haven't figured out a model yet on this piece. Anyone has any ideas, more than welcome.
Does the same matter apply to operator framework-driven environments?
Most likely, yes.
That's what I suspected.
Yeah, but sorry, go ahead.
Now, so on Helm charts, this is maybe a little off topic, but similar to topic. I actually got an interesting request from a customer the other day, and they said that they wanted their Helm charts to continue to track with the Kubernetes objects after they'd done a backup and a restore. So right now they're seeing a problem that if they back up and then restore, the Helm chart is disconnected and no longer manages the application or the Kubernetes objects.
Is that with Valero, Dave?
I'm not sure. I think they may have been using Valero, but it was just basically his thinking of how things would be. So I haven't dug into it much more, but it was it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, should figure out how that works.
I know in Valero it's broken, but yeah.
Yeah, so I suspect it's probably, I don't know if Kasten's doing better there, but that's probably it, for people who actually have working solutions.
I think it works better for us in Helm 3 compared to Helm 2. Helm 2, we weren't tracking the release objects because they were in a separate namespace, but because in Helm 3, the chart is stored in a secret in the app namespace, backing up and restoring that works pretty well.
And actually on that note, I think to talking about Helm and operator framework, I mean, most of these do leverage the label selection mechanism, as in there's a label that gets propagated down. So I think they actually might fit well into this model over here if we have label support.
Yes, if label plus selector is the model, then it should.
Because there are grouping mechanisms today in Kubernetes. One, you've got namespace and you've got labels. And I think if we can find a way to support those in here, this would satisfy most of what customers are already doing to group applications together.
Yeah, but I guess my question over here, my problem at this point, I haven't got any solution yet, is how do we effectively use an application API to manage Helm chart deployed workload? You see what I mean?
Wouldn't the Helm chart have to deploy the application CRD?
Yeah, that's probably what would need to happen.
I thought the application CRD was just like a manifest. It didn't replace Helm. So Helm would be the execution of it, and the application CRD would end up being like a descriptor, somewhat like replacing Helm's chart.yaml maybe, or similar.
Yeah, it's certainly not a replacement of Helm. It just we if this is the model we need to take, we need to find a way to connect the dots. Basically, as you said, application CRD is just a manifest plus some metadata information of this whole application. If you take a look at the descriptors piece, right, it says, oh, this is my WordPress application, and those are links, those are the keywords, and this is my version, etc., etc. And those pieces of information, Helm chart does maintain this piece of information as well, right? I haven't got my head clear around how how the application API could be used to support Helm well. But again, I didn't get enough time to think it through as well. I don't want to waste everybody's time because I already spent all my slots. So we can discuss offline, but Xin and I is going to start working on the application cap along with SIG-Apps. I'm connecting with them. So anyone who is interested into those discussions, please let us know.
All right.
Right? Xin,
Thanks.
please, you can take over.
All right. Let's see the next one. Oh, okay. So Jeff and John, can you give an update of the object bucket cap? Let me stop sharing. Go ahead and share yours.
Okay, John, are you wanting to talk or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and give the
Okay,
the update. So we just an hour ago conducted a second review of the cap. There's been a few mutations of the design thus far, mostly bringing it in line with the CSI or volume snapshot controller system. Some renaming has taken place, so we're ditching the object bucket claim and object bucket nomenclature. That's yeah.
Sorry for the interruption, but this group's never seen the cap. Maybe we should just start at the 1,000-foot view of sort of what we're doing.
Oh,
right. Can you share your screen so that people can see what you're talking about?
Share the, the cap so they can see the PR.
Yeah.
And I did put a link in the chat, in this Zoom chat. The first link there is the cap.
Yeah, we'll do. Let me open this up here.
And we could share that screen and just sort of talk about more of the high level stuff that this work group might be interested, just knowing that this exists.
Okay. So yeah, the high level view here, we are introducing a enhancement that will make object buckets first-class citizens in Kubernetes to be managed by SIG storage, and with a implementation similar to that of CSI. There will be a central controller. There will be a sidecar controller, and there will be drivers which will implement the business logic of bucket provisioning per object store vendor. The sidecar will be deployed with the driver, excuse me, in the same pod, and will communicate over a gRPC interface. We're calling it COSI, the Container Object Store Interface. And the discussion thus far has been pretty lively. There's been a lot of interest in SIG storage of late in something like this, and a lot of support for it. Some of the chief goals here, I'm not going to subject you guys to reading all this stuff verbatim, but we want to provide strictly a Kubernetes control plane for object storage. We are not trying to provide a data path, that being a alternative or a wrapper or a shim for S3, GCS, Azure Blob, excuse me. That is something we feel like we are enabling the development for, and can be provided, can be integrated down the line. We are trying to, as an MVP, enable 3 kind of high-level use cases. Greenfield, which is the generation of new empty buckets. Brownfield, which is the integration of existing buckets for which access, that is credentials or IAM roles and whatnot, will be generated dynamically for connection requests. And then static buckets, which I'm sorry, let me back up to brownfield for a sec. So in the brownfield case, we expect there to also be a driver in the cluster, so that the system looks pretty much the same as greenfield. It's just that we're generating credentials for an existing bucket, not creating a new bucket. The static case assumes that there is no driver available for an object store. And so we still want to be able to give users the ability to integrate their buckets into the cluster. And some of the automation will be handled by the central COSI controller. There's not going to be a sidecar. There's some expectation of manual work for the administrator, where they will define a This part of the design is still a little up in the air, but either we'll say a bucket class to represent this backend bucket that goes, and then they'll define a secret containing access credentials for that bucket. New connection requests will be handled by copying this secret to the user's namespace so that a user can still interact at the Kubernetes level and make requests for connections, get credentials to make that connection. So it's a minimal level of automation, but for users interacting with object stores for which there is no driver yet, this is a system that kind of gives them an entry point into the Cozy ecosystem. Before I go on, does that generate any questions? Okay, and feel free, please, at any moment to just jump in and ask me a question. I'd much rather answer it as they come to mind.
And of course, feel free to review the KEP PR and add comments, questions, feedback there as well.
So let's see. I don't know if I want to dive straight into the workflows. Jeff, what do you?
Well, I just think that I think the point of us being invited here was just to make this work group aware that we are working with SIG storage to expose buckets through Kubernetes custom resources and allow them to be managed through Kubernetes controllers that basically do reconciliation. And then we have an API for that. And I don't think it's really necessary to go through the details of that, because if you have an interest, you can surely read the KEP and add your comments there. We do have weekly review meetings on this KEP. We just had one this morning. We're going to have another one in about a week, and John will set out an invite. So I would say that either if you're on the SIG storage list, you're already aware of this. And if you're not on the SIG storage list and this interests you, either join SIG storage or let John know, and we will add you to the calendar invite for the next formal review meeting.
Hey, when you schedule the review meeting, can you try to avoid some of the major community meetings? Because I think last week it overlaps with the CSI community sync up, which only happens like once a month.
Oh no, yeah, okay, I will definitely do that. I'll take a look at the SIG calendar and make sure we don't have any conflict.
And John, to be very honest, 8 a.m. in the West Coast seems to be too early.
I know, and I apologize. We have a bunch of conflicts today, and that was the only time slot that Jeff and I could make.
I'm West Coast too, so I feel the pain. Yes, we know those things. The meeting today was tough to fit in. Maybe it should have been on a different day. Lesson learned.
But you have your meetings recorded, right? So maybe you can send out the recording after the meeting. You know, if people cannot make it, maybe they can listen to the recording.
Yes, yeah, I uploaded the last meeting to YouTube last week and put the link in the calendar invite. I didn't know if like that would be kind of too much like spam in the SIG storage. I'll go ahead and do that though. Send out the link to that in case people are interested.
Okay.
I'll just make that a periodic habit.
And you know, John and I are both at Red Hat, and then there's been some good feedback from Google, but this is a community-wide proposal, so we'd really like input from everyone.
So in the last meeting, I remember there was some discussion around the namespace of the storage bucket class, something. So that got resolved.
Yes,
that's been resolved. We
okay.
are so to be a little more in line with the block and file, the bucket class will be cluster scoped, and the now named bucket content object, formerly object bucket.
Okay, so that's more like aligned with the snapshot naming.
Yes.
So the content is the one that is associated with the real bucket, right?
Correct.
Okay.
and it's cluster wide. So John, we're about to push up the latest changes to the KEP. You'll see the commit for that, and you can see there's quite a few changes we made in the last week, based 100% based on the feedback from the first formal review meeting we had a week ago.
Okay.
And yeah, so namespace was a big area that we addressed, namespacing as well as the API itself.
Okay, thanks.
And I think that's it. Just we're open to more input.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for having us here.
Yeah, appreciate it.
So open issues. Does anyone have any open issues? There are actually some issues we can discuss here. Before I go ahead, and want to ask if anyone want to talk about something.
I did have a quick follow-up question for Sean. Just to clarify something in the doc, when you say quiesce, unquiesce, are you talking largely about generic quiesce, unquiesce, like freeze, unfreeze? Or are you talking about application-specific things as well, like flush tables with read lock, or Mongo's flock, or that kind of thing? Is this general or specific, or application specific?
It's generic framework which allows application specific commands to run against any container it wants.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
Yeah, Shantian, should that actually include more than only the freeze and application, right? There's I remember Andrew mentioned there could be like multiple steps you have to do.
Oh yeah, but that's
the preparation. Everything is probably.
But that's all application specific, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the hook definition, you give them the way that multiple steps can happen to against certain container, or they can select which container to run, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And this is more about how individual applications can implement their own hooks, right?
Yeah.
But
okay.
in your KEP, when you supply a way to define those hooks, you don't support for specific applications, no?
No, this is general. This is just like general.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So
okay.
when I say quiesce over there, to answer Tom's question, it's really about a generic community supported API, which allows specific application to stuck in their own procedure. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And so to summarize, the document is, I think, kind of, when it says quiesce and quiesce, it's actually talking about the KEP that Xing put together.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So there is actually one thing I'd like to bring up. Let me find the issue first. I think it's it's relevant to this group. This is related to like the restore, the relationship between PVC and snapshots. Let me actually go to this issue. Can you see this one? It's an issue open under external provisioner. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, we probably talked about it like a little bit in the beginning when we first started this meeting. And of course, this is more related to the snapshot API software and its relationship with the volumes. There's right now the life cycle of the PVCs and volume snapshots, they are independent, but I think there are some storage systems. For some storage system, they are actually dependent. So when you say delete a volume, if there are still snapshots on that volume, actually, for some storage system, they actually cannot really delete that volume until all the snapshots are deleted. But for others, they are independent, right? Once the snapshots are created, they are you can actually create the source volume. So I think this type of this issue actually comes up again and again. So here we are talking about one potential solution, which is to add a controller capability. Snapshots depends on volume controller capability in CSI. And then if that is true, then we can add a finalizer on the source PVC when taking a snapshot, and then we remove that only after all the snapshots are deleted. I think there was some discussion there. Yes.
I have a general question with regarding to adding finalizers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I feel this finalizer here will not really solve the problem, right? Because finalizer protects your PVC not being deleted from your API server, but it should not interfere with the external provisioner's work. If external provisioner says that thing is still will try to delete the PV, no?
So it will still put the deleting timestamp on that PVC. That is true. I think there's also I think there's some other comments here saying that there's one problem is if you want to do like an in-place restore, you want to keep the PVC name or something, but so basically, let's say if we don't have this proposed new finalizer thing, right? Then you can delete the PVC, but you can still have your PV and the volume there, and then you can create a new PVC with the same name, kind of rebind that one to the original PV with the data, and then this way allow you to do some kind of a restore, right? So this is kind of restore to the original PVC name at least. But then if we add this finalizer, then you can't really delete that PVC anymore until you delete all snapshot. Then you can't really use that snapshot to restore, and then that's a problem. So there is actually
this is valid. We've run into this as well. Yep. Cinder is one of them where we've hit this.
Hey, can I add a suggestion?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to suggest that we make it not a per controller, but a per snapshot property, so that we have the possibility of mixing different types of snapshots in the same controller.
Per snapshot.
So I see us from our side, from like the VMware side, I see us, right now, everything's a local snapshot and it would be dependent, but we're working on mechanisms to make them independent. And there may even be a transition period where, like something is being copied and it's currently a dependent snapshot, but it's going to change into an independent snapshot when the copy finishes.
Oh, but if that's the case, then how you can't have can't have the snapshot property keep changing. In the beginning, it is dependent, and then it becomes not dependent when it is done copying. That's
Dave. This might be the reverse of the case you're talking about. I think the case you're talking about is in VMware, at least. If you delete the volume, the snapshots will go away. Is that correct?
I think right now we actually block it if the snapshots exist.
Okay, so it's the same issue then.
Okay. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think actually a lot of storage systems have this problem. Yeah, that's why in Cinder it's actually blocked from the API level. It can't even do this thing. But here, Kubernetes API allows this. But yeah, so I think I see that it's already almost time. So this is an open issue. So I know there are definitely problems here. We don't have a good solution yet. So can comment on this issue, and we can look at this later. Okay, so sounds like this one, yeah, this one still have some problems even if we go this way, right? And then there are also some issues raised by Ashish on the external snapshot repo. So we're going to talk about that in the next volume snapshot working group meeting, which is Monday, because there are quite a few. I don't think we can fit it in the time in this meeting. So, okay, that's all I have. Anything else? All right, that's it for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.